What if the person you trusted most betrayed you in the worst way possible? What if it wasn't just a friend, but your own mother, and the man she betrayed you with was your boyfriend? Imagine this. You've spent your whole life believing in the people closest to you, the ones who are supposed to love you unconditionally. Then, without warning, everything you thought you knew gets ripped apart. The truth comes crashing down, leaving a trail of destruction you never saw coming. This is the story of a young woman whose perfect life was shattered by the shocking affair between her mother and her boyfriend, a betrayal that led to a devastating crime. But here's where it gets chilling. What happens when trust breaks down so completely that it leads to irreversible consequences? Keep watching as we unravel the mystery piece by piece, and stay with me until the end. You won't believe how this story ends. Meet Sophia, a bright, driven university student with dreams as big as her heart. At 24, she was on track to make a name for herself, focused, hardworking, and in a stable relationship with her boyfriend, David. He was charming, ambitious, and completely in love with her. They made the perfect couple, or so it seemed. Sophia's life appeared flawless, a promising future ahead, a loving boyfriend by her side, and a family that others would envy. Maria, her mother, was well known in their community, respected by many for her grace and dedication, a role model of sorts. She balanced her social life and demands of her marriage to Carlos, a successful businessman. Sophia had everything, or so she thought. What seemed like a perfect family, a perfect relationship, was hiding cracks no one could see. Beneath the surface, a storm was quietly brewing, but then everything changed. Sophia had always trusted her mother, confided in her, and sought her advice. She was the woman Sophia admired most, the one who helped shape her ambitions, the one who seemed to understand her dreams and fears. But as continued to build her future, Sophia had no idea how far that trust would be tested. Something was lurking behind the perfect picture, something no one saw coming. Maria was everything a mother should be: supportive, nurturing, always there when Sophia needed advice or a helping hand. She was the epitome of grace, the kind of woman people admired, and Sophia looked up to her as ultimate role model. To everyone around them, the family was perfect. Sophia's achievements, Carlos's success, Maria's poise, it all seemed so flawless. Maria was always at the center of their social world. The gracious host at elegant dinners, the perfect mother attending every PTA meeting, always smiling, always composed. She made it look so easy the way she balanced it all, maintaining a pristine home and a picture-perfect family life. But deep inside, Maria was wrestling with her own silent yearning. She had sacrificed so much of herself over the years, her own ambitions, her own desires to build this life, this image of perfection. She'd put everything into her marriage to Carlos, who was a successful businessman. But now, at 50, she felt something was missing. Maria's world had become predictable, routine. She loved her family, but in her heart, she yearned for something more, a spark, a sense of excitement she hadn't felt in years. Something was calling her, but she didn't know what. She wondered if it was the thrill of new experiences, the kind of freedom she saw in others, or perhaps just a taste of the passion that had once been a part of her life. And that's when David entered the picture. Then there's David, charming, confident, and full of ambition. At 25, he was already making waves in the local music scene, playing gigs, and dreaming of a future as a successful artist. His passion for music was undeniable, and it was one of the reasons Sophia was so drawn to him. She admired his creativity, his drive, and the way he pursued his dreams with everything he had. To everyone around them, David and Sophia made the perfect couple. They had been together for years, supporting each other through the ups and downs of university life, their bond growing stronger with time. But like any relationship, it wasn't without its struggles. As David's career began to take off, Sophia found herself caught between her own ambitions and her commitment to their relationship, trying to balance her love for him with her pursuit of a career in journalism. On surface, everything seemed fine, but behind the scenes, something was starting to shift. It wasn't just the pressures of his career or the tension that comes with chasing big dreams. There was another force at play, something David didn't see coming. David's charm had captivated many, his smile, his charisma, his easy confidence. But it was his connection with Maria, Sophia's mother, that would change everything. At first, their interactions seemed harmless enough. Casual meetings about his music, advice about the industry, the kind of guidance a mentor might give a young artist. But slowly, that professional relationship began to blur into something far more personal. Neither David nor Maria could have predicted how deep this connection would go or how it would lead them down a path they couldn't turn back from. It started innocently enough. The first time David and Maria met, it was at a family gathering. A casual dinner at Sophia's parents' house, a celebration of a recent achievement in her life. Maria was hosting, as she always did, her warm smile greeting each guest with genuine hospitality, and David, ever that charming young man, was there as Sophia's boyfriend, eager to meet her parents and show them the man she'd chosen to be by her side first. The interaction was simple, polite exchanges, small talk about the weather, and mutual introductions. But as the evening wore on, something shifted. It was subtle at first, a compliment here, a shared joke there. David mentioned a new song he was working on, and Maria's eyes lit up. Intrigued by his passion, she'd always been fascinated by the world of music, though she had long since put her own creative dreams on hold. David's enthusiasm rekindled something in her, something long buried. The two of them found themselves in a quiet corner of the room, talking about his music, her interest in the arts, and the way their different worlds seemed to overlap. There was an ease in the conversation, a natural connection that neither expected. It was clear they shared more than just casual pleasantries. They both had an appreciation for beauty, for creativity, and for the deeper things in life. David admired Maria's poise, her elegance, her wisdom. He was drawn to her calm confidence, her graceful presence in the room. Maria, in turn, found herself captivated by David's raw talent, his ambition, and his youthful energy. They talked for hours, mostly about music, but also about life, philosophy, the things they wanted to achieve, and the roads they had yet to travel. It started with small compliments, shared laughter, and long discussions about music. But over time, that chemistry would turn into something darker. As the night drew to a close, they exchanged smiles that lingered just a little too long, a handshake that felt just a bit too intimate. No one else seemed to notice the undercurrent of something unspoken, but the seed had been planted. What was once an innocent conversation between a mentor and her daughter's boyfriend was slowly shifting, and neither David nor Maria knew it yet. But this moment would mark the beginning of a dangerous path. As the weeks passed, what began as innocent conversations about music gradually evolved into something else. David and Maria found themselves spending more and more time together. At first, it was under the pretense of helping him with his music career, advice about the industry, introductions to potential connections. Maria, with her experience and status in the community, seemed like the perfect mentor for David. But the meetings soon became more frequent, more intimate. What was once a professional exchange started to feel like something far more personal. David never questioned the growing closeness between them. After all, it was all about the music, right? But something was shifting. Maria, in her role as Sophia's mother, always appeared so composed, so calm. But now David noticed the subtle way she would lean in closer when she spoke, the way her laughter seemed to linger a bit longer than it should. He dismissed it as nothing more than friendly encouragement. After all, Maria was just being supportive, wasn't she? But Sophia wasn't blind. She began to notice the changes in her mother's behavior. How Maria seemed to seek out David's company more often than before. How their conversations were longer. And how she would often make small gestures of admiration when speaking to him. There was a warmth in her gaze, a closeness that didn't quite feel right. Sophia brushed it off at first, convinced that her suspicions were just the result of her own insecurities. She told herself she was just being paranoid, that she had nothing to worry about. David loved her, and Maria had always been supportive of their relationship. Why would things be any different now? But deep down, something was nagging at her. The more she observed, the more the little details seemed to add up. A glance held too long, a touch on the arm that lingered just a bit too much. A moment of laughter that felt far too intimate. Sophia's instinct screamed at her that something was off, but she couldn't bring herself to confront it, to ask the question that she feared would tear her world apart. What Sophia didn't know, what no one could have known, was that the seeds of betrayal had already been planted. They were buried deep, hidden beneath layers of subtle smiles and innocent conversions. But they were there growing slowly, and they would soon bloom into something neither she nor David could ever have imagined. One evening, Maria invited David over for dinner. She told him it was another opportunity to discuss his music, help him strategize, offer advice on his next steps. Sophia was out, and Maria had the house to herself. It was the perfect setting for what Maria had planned, a quiet, intimate night with David, just two of them. The evening began innocently enough. Maria had prepared a carefully curated meal, an elegant spread of wine, gourmet dishes, the kind of dinner conversation that was meant to impress. David, ever the gracious guest, complimented her cooking and spoke about his latest music projects, his hopes, his fears. He felt comfortable, relaxed. After all, this was the woman who had supported his career, who had encouraged him from the very beginning. But Maria's demeanor was different that night. There was something about her smile, the way her eyes lingered on him just a bit too long, the way she touched his arm as she poured him another glass of wine. The warmth in her voice wasn't just for guidance anymore. It was personal. The tension in the air was palpable, but David was too caught up in the moment to notice. Slowly, without either of them realizing it, the conversation shifted. Music, once the center of their connection, began to fade into the background. Instead, they talked about life, about their dreams, their regrets, their unspoken desires. Maria's questions became more pointed, more intimate. She asked about his relationships, about Sophia, about what he wanted out of life. It was as if she was trying to understand him, to get closer, to reach inside his mind. David, slightly buzzed from the wine and caught up in the intimacy of the moment, answered honestly. Too honestly, had talked about the pressures of his career, the uncertainty of his future, his longing for something more. Mary listened, her gaze never leaving him, her presence so close that it seemed to consume him. And then, without warning, it happened. One night, it wasn't about the music anymore. The conversation shifted, and before either knew it, the lines had been crossed. Maria leaned in, her hand grazing his, her breath warm against his skin. Her touch, once innocent, had become something else entirely. The air between them thickened, and all pretense of professionalism slipped away. Maria's voice dropped, her words slow and deliberate, pulling David closer with each breath. She told him he was talented, that he deserved more than he realized, that he had so much to offer the world. But it wasn't just his music she was talking about now. It was him, his presence, his energy. Maria's Gazenever wavered, her lips curving into a smile that no longer felt like a friendly gesture. David, unsure at first, felt the pull, the heat, the connection, the forbidden allure. Maria wasn't just the mentor anymore. She was something much more dangerous, much more irresistible. What started as a simple dinner to talk about his future became a moment neither of them could ever walk away from. The boundaries blurred, and what was meant to be a professional relationship twisted into something darker. Neither Maria nor David could have anticipated it then, but they had crossed a line, and the consequences would follow them both in ways they could never escape. It wasn't long before the affair between David and Maria grew impossible to hide. What had started as a few stolen moments, a look here, a touch there, soon erupted into something neither of them could control. The passion that simmered beneath the surface, hidden behind closed doors, began to consume them both. David, caught in the whirlwind of emotions and desires, no longer questioned their connection. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was something deeper, something far more dangerous. The more time he spent with Maria, the more he found himself drawn to her, her confidence, her allure. He told himself it was just temporary, that he'd find a way to sort it all out later. But deep down, he knew this was a road he cowled never come back from. Maria, for her part, had never imagined how far she'd let this go. What started as a flirtation, an escape from the routine of her life, had turned into an all-consuming obsession. She had always believed her marriage to Carlos was unbreakable, that her family was perfect. But in those quiet moments with David, she'd rediscovered a side of herself. She thought she'd lost a side that felt desired, alive, wanted, and she couldn't let go. But now, the inevitable was about to unfold. Neither of them knew it yet, but their secret was about to shatter everything. Sophia had no idea. As she went about her day, planning a surprise dinner for David, she was blissfully unaware of the chaos that was unfolding just beneath the surface. She'd worked hard to create a perfect evening candlelight, her favorite meal, soft music. She wanted to surprise David with a quiet, intimate dinner to remind him of how much she loved him. She had even picked out a gift, something small but meaningful. It was supposed to be a night to reaffirm their bond, to show him how much he meant to her. But as Sophia set the table, David was preparing to walk straight into the most dangerous moment of his life. The phone call had come earlier that afternoon. Maria had invited him over once more under the same pretense as all the others, talking about his music, discussing his future. But this time there was no pretense. This time there were no boundaries left to cross. Their affair was no longer a secret, and the reality of what they hadn't was about to catch up with them. David had no idea the danger he was walking into, and neither did Sophia. While she carefully arranged flowers in the vase, planning the perfect evening, David was moments away from betraying her in the worst way possible, right under her nose. What would happen when the truth came crashing down? As David left Maria's house that night, unaware of the storm he was about to unleash, Sophia waited for him, naive, hopeful, and completely unaware that the man she loved had already betrayed her trust. The consequences of their actions were about to change everything, and no one would come out of this unscathed. As the days passed, David's behavior began to shift. It wasn't immediate, but it was noticeable. A subtle change in the way he carried himself, the way he spoke, the way he looked at Sophia. He was more distant, his usual warmth replaced by a quiet anxiety that he couldn't quite shake. He was no longer the confident, carefree man that Sophia had fallen in love with. Now he seemed burdened, as though something weighed heavily on his mind. David would often find himself lost in thought, his gaze drifting off in the middle of conversations, his answers coming slower, more strained. His once eager smile now appeared forced, and the laughter that used to come so easily seemed like an effort. Sophia noticed. Of course, she had always been in tune with David, able to sense when something was off. At first, she thought it was just stress from his music career, maybe the pressure of balancing their relationship and his growing ambitions. But soon, the mood swings became more frequent, more pronounced. One moment he would be withdrawn, the next overly anxious, unable to sit still. Sophia couldn't ignore it. She felt the distance growing between them, the emotional walls creeping up, where once there had been openness, but she didn't suspect the true reason behind it. She couldn't bring herself to think that David, the man she trusted above all others, could be hiding something so deep, so dark. The cracks were starting to show. Maria's sudden interest in David's music, too, had begun to raise questions in Sophia's mind. What had once seemed like innocent mentorship now felt more like something else. Maria's frequent calls, the way she would suggest change of his songs, the way her compliments had shifted from professional to personal. Sophia noticed it all. But instead of confronting it, she pushed it to the back of her mind, telling herself that it was just her imagination. Thatch was overthinking things. It was hard to ignore, though. The frequency of their meetings seemed to increase, and every time David came back from seeing Maria, there was an unsettling tension in the air. Sophia's instincts were telling her something was wrong, but she couldn't put the pieces together. She wanted to trust David, wanted to believe that this was just a phase, something that would pass. But the unease was growing stronger with every passing day. David couldn't hide it forever. The guilt gnawed at him, eating away at the facade he had built. Every moment with Sophia, every time he looked into her eyes, reminded him of the betrayal he had allowed to happen. He couldn't escape the truth that he had crossed a line. a line that had now created a divide he wasn't sure he could ever close. But he wasn't the only one carrying the weight. Sophia's growing concern was becoming unbearable. She felt the shift, the unspoken tension in their relationship, but the truth of what was really happening still eluded her. As time went on, Maria's control over David grew stronger, and so did her obsession with him. What began as a fleeting moment of temptation had transformed into something far more dangerous, an intricate game, one that Maria was playing with calculated precision. She was no longer just seducing him with her charm and allure. She was weaving a web of emotional manipulation, pulling him in deeper with each passing day. Maria's actions became less about the physical pleasure of their affair and more about the power she wielded over David. She knew exactly how to push his buttons, how to make him feel important, special, needed. Every conversation, every touch was a carefully crafted move in a larger plan. She wasn't just enjoying the affair for what it was. She was using it to control him, to shape his emotions, and to make him feel beholden to her in ways that went far beyond their physical connection. Maria's game wasn't just about sex, it was about power, and she would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. She began to manipulate his every move. When David doubted himself, when he questioned his future in the music industry, Maria was there, with words of encouragement, but there was always an undercurrent of control beneath her praise. She'd tell him how talented he was, how he deserved more, how his dreams would never come true without her guidance. Each compliment, each word of support was like a thread pulling him closer to her, further away from the life he had built with Sophia. David, feeling lost and unsure, clung to Maria's words. She was the one who saw him, who understood him in ways he felt no one else could. Her attention made him feel valued, wanted something he didn't realize he had been craving. But Maria wasn't just the mentor anymore. She was the one dictating his choices, his thoughts, even his desires. Every time David thought he was escaping her influence, Maria would reel him back in. A late-night phone call, a just one more meeting to discuss his music, a gentle touch that lingered a moment too long. Each encounter was another layer of control, another step deeper into her manipulation. David's resistance was wearing thin, and soon he would be trapped in a world he could no longer control. Maria's obsession with David was no longer about the affair itself. It was about possession, about bending him to her will. She wanted to keep him, not just as a lover, but as someone who was emotionally bound to her, someone who would always come back to her no matter how far he tried to run. The signs had been there for weeks, little pieces of the puzzle that didn't fit. Sophia had sensed something was off, but she had ignored it, convinced that her doubts were just the product of her own insecurities. But that evening, everything would change. Sophia came home early, planning to surprise David with a quiet evening together. She opened the door to their apartment, only to find the atmosphere heavy, thick with a tension she couldn't explain. The house was silent, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. But there was something else, something in the air that made her skin crawl. As she walked through the living room, her eyes caught something: David's jacket slung over the back of a chair. It wasn't just that he'd left it there. It was the way it had been hastily thrown aside, as though he was in a rush. She moved deeper into the apartment, each step heavier than last, her heart sinking in her chest. And then she saw it. A half-empty glass of wine, a small lipstick mark on the rim of a coffee mug, clues that told a story she didn't want to believe. With a sinking heart, Sophia walked into a nightmare she never expected. The pieces were falling into place, and the truth was finally laid bare. What she had feared, what she had dismissed as paranoia, was real, and it was worse than she could have imagined. David's infidelity, his betrayal, was no longer a shadow hanging over her. She could see it, feel it right in front of her. The devastation in her chest was palpable, each breath harder than the last. She wanted to scream, to shout, but all she could do was stand there, her world crumbling around her. And then, just as she was about to confront him, David walked into the room, his face pale, eyes wide with panic. He froze when he saw her standing there, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was suffocating, and in that silence, The reality of everything they had both been hiding hung heavy, but this wasn't the only confrontation brewing. While David and Sophia stood frozen in the tension of the moment, Carlos, Sophia's father, was just pulling into the driveway after returning home from a business trip. Had been away for days, and the feeling of unease had been gnawing at him. Throughout the drive, something about the situation at home didn't sit right. He entered the house, his sharp gaze scanning the room. He saw the tension in the air between David and Sophia before either of them could speak a word. His instincts kicked in. Something was off, and he wasn't going to stand by and let his daughter be hurt. His protective nature, honed through years of providing for his family, surged to the surface. Carlos's eyes fell on David, and in an instant, everything changed. The betrayal, the tension, the years of building frustration, it all exploded at once. Rage consumed him as he saw the look on David's face. His daughter, his only daughter, had been hurt, and Carlos could feel the fury rising in him like a tide. He couldn't control. Words were exchanged, shouted accusations, harsh, bitter truths. But in the heat of the moment, those words were drowned out by the roar of rage that overtook him. David, stunned by the confrontation, tried to back away, but the room was closing in around him. Carlos, lost in his fury, lunged at David with an aggression he never knew he was capable of. The struggle was brief, chaotic, and then it happened. In the madness, a single punch, a forceful strike, sent David crashing backward. He stumbled. His feet lost beneath him, and he collided violently with the corner off the coffee table. In an instant, everything changed. What started as a quiet betrayal ended in a tragic loss. A single moment of rage led to a life-altering consequence. David lay motionless on the floor, the room spinning into darkness. Sophia screamed, rushing to him, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The once perfect family was now shattered, and the price of betrayal would be paid in ways no one could ever have anticipated. The weight of the moment hit Carlos like a freight train. In the chaos of his anger, in the overwhelming rush of emotions that had consumed him, he hadn't realized what he had done until it was too late. David lay motionless on the floor, and the silence that followed was deafening, filled with the tragic realization of what his rage had caused. Carlos knew he couldn't undo what had happened. The weight of his own rage now hung over him like a shadow, suffocating him in its grip. He had been consumed by the desire to protect his daughter, but in doing so, he had destroyed everything he held dear. The man he had just killed, David, was not just some stranger. He had been his daughter's boyfriend, the man she loved, the man she trusted. And now Carlos had taken that trust away in a single irreversible moment. As the reality of the tragedy sank in, the panic began to set in. The police would be called. His actions would be known to the world. He couldn't take back the death of David. He couldn't undo the violence that had shattered his family. All he could do now was face the consequences of his actions. Carlos couldn't run from this. He knew he had to take responsibility for what had happened. Slowly, almost mechanically, he walked over to the phone and dialed the police. When the officer on the other end answered, he spoke plainly, as if the weight of his confession had already overwhelmed him. "I've just killed someone," he said, his voice heavy with remorse. In that moment, Carlos knew that nothing would ever be the same. He had lost everything, and for what? For a moment of rage, for a betrayal he could never have expected. The days that followed were a blur of police reports, interrogations, and legal proceedings. But for Sophia, the world had come crashing down in ways that words could not describe. Her heart ached with the loss of David, the man she had loved, the man whose dreams had seemed intertwined with hers. The betrayal stung deeper than she had ever imagined, not just from David, but from her own mother, Maria. The truth had unraveled before her eyes, and there was no way to put it back together. Sophia was devastated, not just by the loss of her boyfriend, but by the realization that both her mother and her father had betrayed her. In the worst way possible, the foundation of her life, the trust she had built with the people she loved, had been ripped apart. There was no going back, no fixing this. Maria, her own mother, had not only broken her daughter's heart, she had shattered the very core of their family. And now, faced with the weight of her actions, Maria was consumed with guilt. The woman who had once been the pillar of Sophia's world, the one she turned to for guidance, now stood broken, unable to face the consequences of her betrayal. Maria couldn't stay. The guilt was overwhelming, the shame unbearable. She packed her things in silence. Barely able to meet her daughter's eyes, she knew she had destroyed their family, and she could not face the woman her actions had made her into. "I'm sorry," Maria whispered, but there was nothing Moretto say. She left, seeking solace in the anonymity of a new place, a new life. But no matter where she went, she would carry the weight of her choices with her forever. In the end, no one escaped unscathed. What was left was a family torn apart by betrayal, guilt, and a crime that could never be undone. The love that had once bound them together had been consumed by lies, by hidden desires, and by rage. Sophia, now alone, had to rebuild her life from the ashes of everything she thought she knew. But how do you move forward when everything you trusted has crumbled? How do you howl when the people you love have destroyed the very foundation of who you are? As the days stretched into weeks, the family's fracture became permanent. There would be no mending, no forgiveness for Sophia, for Carlos, or for Maria. The damage was too deep, the pain too great. This is a story of betrayal, but also of choices. Choices. Moments where decisions made in the heat of emotion or under the weight of desire can alter the course of our lives forever. In an instant, everything changed for Sophia, for David, for Maria, and for Carlos. What started as a simple relationship, a mother and daughter, a young couple in love, turned into a nightmare of regret, guilt, and loss. One moment of betrayal shattered the lives of everyone involved, and no one emerged unscathed. The truth is, we'll make choices big and small that shape the course of our lives. Sometimes we act out of anger, out of fear, or out of a need for something more. But rarely do we stop to think about the ripple effects those choices might have. When the heat of the moment clouds our judgment, we risk losing everything we hold dear, and once those choices are made, there's no turning back. For Sophia, the consequences were devastating. Her family was torn apart, her heart broken. For David, the cost of his betrayal was his life. For Maria and Carlos, their lives were forever changed by a single irreversible moment of rage and lust. So what would you do if your life was turned upside down by betrayal? What if the people you trusted most hurt you in ways you could never imagine? How far would you go to protect what you love? And what would you risk in the process? Think before you act, because sometimes the consequences of a single choice can be life-changing. We may never fully understand the impact of our decisions until it's too late. That's why it's so important to pause, to reflect, and to consider the people around us before we make a choice that could tear everything apart. If you found this story shocking, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Share your thoughts on how far you think betrayal can go and what you would do. If you were in Sophia's shoes, could you ever forgive someone who hurt you so deeply? Or would you walk away for good?